If this story hits something real in you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. It means more than you know. I heard him say it from across the room, clear as a struck bell over the jazz music and the polished chatter and the sound of champagne flutes colliding in mock celebration. She's mine at the office. And then I heard my wife laugh, not a polite social laugh, not the careful, measured kind she deployed at functions like this one, the real thing. Head back, shoulders loose, the laugh I used to believe belonged to me. That was the moment everything I had spent 6 months quietly building finally had a reason to exist. Let me back up. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 49 years old. For the past 11 years, I've held the position of Corporate Risk Director at Vantage Energy Group, a Fortune 500 company headquartered in Houston. Before that, 8 years at Moreland & Pierce, one of the most respected legal consulting firms in Texas for corporate ethics and internal investigations. My career has been built on a single discipline: identifying the cracks in a system before they become craters, teaching executives to recognize the conditions that produce scandal, making misconduct expensive, traceable, and impossible to quietly erase. The brutal irony of what happened to my own marriage was not lost on me for a single day. My wife Diane and I had been married for 17 years. We met at an ethics compliance symposium in Dallas in 2008. She was sharp in the way that commands attention without demanding it, the kind of intelligence that made other people in a room quietly recalibrate how much they were paying attention. She had just been promoted to Senior Human Resources Director at Vantage, and I was brought in as an outside consultant helping draft their new conduct framework. We matched each other in the way that made everything else feel slightly slower. Same industry, same appetite for precision, same understanding that corporate life was a long, layered game where the truly dangerous moves were always the ones that looked routine. Or my pareja, I had believed. We had 2 children, Sophie, 16, with a mind that sometimes unsettled me with how much it saw, and Connor, 12, the kid who had made me understand something about love that I couldn't have articulated before he existed. I didn't know yet what the science would eventually confirm about his biology. That information was still somewhere in the future, circling like a bird waiting for the right moment to land. The Vantage annual gala was held at the Riverside Convention Center, one of those glass and steel buildings along Buffalo Bayou that existed specifically for occasions like this, to give people a place to perform versions of themselves that didn't quite exist anywhere else. Black ties, champagne, speeches about market growth and executive vision. I had attended enough of these events to understand their essential nature. Pure theater, everyone playing their assigned role with the particular kind of precision that made pretending feel like professionalism. I was standing at the bar, holding a glass I wasn't drinking, when I heard it. Derek Colton, Regional Sales Director, 40 years old, custom suit, the kind of teeth that imply both money and aggression. He was holding court with 3 colleagues from the sales floor, drink in hand, wearing that expression he always carried. The satisfied smirk of a man who had confused access with achievement. I knew him by reputation more than interaction. He knew me the same way, if he knew me at all. "She's mine at the office," Derek said. His voice cut through the ambient noise with the ease of someone who had no concern about being overheard. The men around him laughed. One of them, I recognized him from procurement, a man named Warren something, raised his glass in an exaggerated toast. "Quite the arrangement," Warren said. "I assume the husband's operating on a different schedule?" More laughter. Derek shrugged, took a slow sip of his scotch, entirely unbothered. 9 to 5, she's not thinking about him once, he continued. "I think we both prefer it that way." I didn't move, didn't turn. Champagne flute at the midpoint between the bar and my face, suspended. Then I heard Diane laugh. Not a polite half-laugh from a distance. Not the careful, socially appropriate response of a woman who happened to catch a fragment of something. A real laugh. Full, unreserved. The kind that used to occur in our kitchen on a Sunday morning, or in the dark of our bedroom when one of us said something that caught the other off guard. She was standing 10 feet away with her HR team, close enough that she had heard everything. And instead of shutting it down, instead of even stepping back, she threw her head back and laughed like it was the best thing she'd heard all evening. I set my glass on the bar, adjusted my cufflinks, didn't approach them, didn't raise my voice, didn't make any version of the scene that would have been the obvious emotional move. I walked to the terrace, pulled out my phone, and made a call I had been sitting on for months. "Vivian," I said when she answered, "it's Marcus. I'm ready to move forward." I didn't go back inside right away. I let the room wonder. Let Diane scan the ballroom for her dependable husband, the one who always showed up, always smiled, always served as the stable background against which she got to be the compelling foreground. That version of me was done. Vivian Marsh was the keynote speaker that evening. She had flown in from Boston to address the gala's executive audience on the subject of ethical leadership and institutional accountability. Most of the people in that ballroom knew her only from her credentials and her prepared remarks. I knew her from a decade earlier, when Vantage had found itself managing a potential whistleblower situation that required both speed and discretion. Vivian had been the external investigator. I had been the internal liaison coordinating with legal. We had worked well together under pressure. She owed me in the quiet way that professionals accrue obligations to one another, not through debt exactly, but through the specific weight of shared work done in difficult circumstances. More importantly, she remembered. I found her near the stage speaking with Vantage's COO. When she registered my approach, something moved through her expression in sequence: recognition, then recalibration. She excused herself with the smooth efficiency of someone practiced at making exits look like arrivals. "Marcus," she extended her hand, professional, measured. "It's been too long." "It has. Do you have a moment?" We moved to a quiet corner table. I kept my posture relaxed and my voice low. Anyone watching would have seen two former colleagues catching up at an industry event. "I need to activate something," I said. "That consulting arrangement we discussed years ago. The ethics review position. I'm ready to accept it." Quietly. "Starting next month." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. She was reading me, the tension I was managing, the way I had positioned myself to maintain a sightline to Diane across the room, the carefully governed anger beneath my exterior composure. "Personal motivation or professional?" she asked. "Both," I said. "But the work will be professional. You have my word." She nodded slowly, reached into her clutch, produced a business card, wrote something on the back. "Call this number Monday morning. Contracts will be ready by Tuesday." As she handed me the card, she placed her other hand briefly on my shoulder. Not a dramatic gesture, just the physical vocabulary of professional alliance, and it was visible. Quite visible. Across the ballroom, I watched Derek Colton stop mid-sentence, his eyes locked on Vivian's hand on my shoulder, then tracked to the man standing beside him, Robert Walsh, VP of Sales, Derek's direct superior. Derek leaned in and said something urgent. Walsh's expression shifted from neutral to concerned. Derek's face had gone pale. I heard him say, voice pulled tight, "We have a problem." Walsh frowned. "What do you mean?" Derek didn't answer. He was staring at me with the specific expression of someone who has just realized they've been playing a different game than the one they thought they were playing. Vivian noticed. A small smile found the corner of her mouth. "Friend of yours?" "Not exactly," I said, "but he's about to become very familiar with your work." Her smile held. "I look forward to it. They used to call me the ghost. Not to my face, in Slack threads and break room conversations and the kinds of informal gatherings I was never invited to. Diane's husband, the quiet one, the man who materialized at company events, moved through them without friction and disappeared again like furniture rearranging itself. Derek had apparently referred to me once as Mr. Due Diligence, always calculating, never acting, he'd said. He had no idea how precisely accurate that description was. I had been building the file for 6 months, not from paranoia, from habit, from the same professional discipline that had made me good at my job for 2 decades. You don't manage institutional risk through emotional reaction. You collect data, you establish patterns, you build a case with the kind of structural integrity that can survive scrutiny from any direction, and then you choose when to deploy it. The first thread had been hotel receipts, a Marriott in Dallas, expensed under client development. Except the client Diane claimed to be meeting had retired 8 months before that trip. I had confirmed this with a single phone call. Then came the messages. Diane had asked me, 6 months prior, to help transfer data from her work phone before an upgrade. She'd handed me the device without hesitation. "Just make sure nothing gets lost," she'd said. I made sure everything was preserved. Screenshots, timestamps, conversations that started in the language of workplace logistics and drifted over weeks and months into the vocabulary of something else entirely. Wine preferences, shared hotel room references, the architecture of a private world built inside a professional one. The clearest evidence was buried in credit card records. 2 charges on the same weekend at the same hotel, one in Derek's name for room 814, one in Diane's name for room 816, both billed to company cards under client entertainment. Adjacent rooms, a conference in San Diego that neither of their supposed clients had attended. I had printed everything, organized it with the same meticulous structure that Diane had occasionally mocked me for in other contexts, and locked the folder in my home office filing cabinet. 3 months before the gala, Diane had handed me a draft ethics policy update and asked me to review it. Some legal language she couldn't parse. "Just a quick look," she'd said. "I'll make it up to you." What she handed me was not just a policy document, it was an opportunity. I had written half of those clauses myself, years earlier, during my consulting work for Vantage. The sections on professional conduct, expense accountability, and interdepartmental boundaries. I knew every mechanism, every enforcement structure, every consequence pathway. Mi pareja, I had updated the document, strengthened it, added 3 new paragraphs that addressed, with surgical precision, non-client travel between employees of different organizational rank, personal communications on company platforms unrelated to work functions, and conduct likely to generate the appearance of institutional impropriety. Diane had skimmed my revisions, thanked me, and submitted the policy to the board. It was approved unanimously. She had never asked what I had actually written. She had trusted that her reliable husband would help her look competent. Those same clauses were about to serve an entirely different purpose. Remember that in the description and in the pinned comment you have all our supplements, from fitness to health in every sense of the word. Vivian had texted Sunday morning. Simple. Call me when you're alone. I waited until Diane left for her morning run, then dialed. I pulled Vantage's current ethics documentation, Vivian said without preamble. Paragraph 9 is particularly interesting reading. I thought it might be. You wrote this. Parts of it. Years ago with some recent additions. She laughed. Short, precise. Marcus, you're either meticulous or vindictive, possibly both. I prefer thorough. Your thoroughness is going to make my job significantly easier. I'll need everything you have. Documentation, communications, financial records. Can you get them to me by Tuesday? Already scanned and encrypted. I'll send you access codes tonight. A pause. How long have you known? 6 months. Longer if I'm being honest with myself. And you waited. I confirmed, because anger fades, but documentation doesn't. Monday morning, Diane came downstairs dressed for combat. Dark suit, hair precise. The expression she wore when she was about to walk into a room and own it. She poured coffee, checked her phone, barely looked at me. Late meeting tonight, she said. Don't wait up. With Derek? I asked, without looking up from my tablet. She went still. Just for a moment, barely perceptible, before she recovered. What? Derek Colton, regional sales. I assumed that's who the late meeting was with. Her jaw tightened. It's a departmental review, Marcus. Multiple people will be there, of course. I took a sip of coffee and met her eyes over the rim. Just curious. She stared at me like I was an equation she couldn't balance. In 6 months of gathering evidence, I had asked nothing, questioned nothing. played the same predictable role every single day, giving her no reason to adjust her behavior, no reason to increase her caution. Something in my tone had shifted this morning, and she heard it. She simply didn't yet know what it meant. "I'll be home by 10, she said, grabbing her bag. "Take your time," I replied. After she left, I drafted a message to Vivian. Subject, timeline. "I'd like to accelerate. How quickly can you initiate a preliminary compliance review at Vantage, specifically targeting expense reporting and interdepartmental conduct? I can provide documentation sufficient to justify immediate board-level attention." Her response arrived in under 5 minutes. "I can have preliminary findings to the board by Friday. But Marcus, once this starts, there's no pulling it back. Are you certain?" I stared at that question for a long time, thought about Sophie, about Connor, about 17 years of shared history, about the life we had constructed together and the lie it had been built on. Then I thought about Diane's laugh at the gala, the way she had thrown her head back without an ounce of self-consciousness while another man publicly staked his claim on her time, her attention, her private self. The way she had looked at me this morning across the kitchen like I was a piece of furniture she was working around. "I'm certain." "Proceed." That afternoon, Sophie found me in my office. She knocked on the doorframe, hesitant. Sophie was never hesitant. "Dad, can we talk?" "Always. Come in." She sat in the chair across from my desk, turning her phone case over in her hands. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not be angry with me for taking mi pareja long." My stomach dropped. "Okay." She took a breath, then she opened her phone, navigated to a folder, turned the screen toward me. "I've been recording Mom's phone calls for 8 months, the ones she takes in her car before she comes inside. I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what was happening." The folder contained 47 audio files. I looked at my daughter, 16 years old, carrying this alone for 8 months, and something in my chest did a thing I had no vocabulary for. "Sophie," I said carefully, "why didn't you tell me sooner?" Her eyes filled. "Because I wanted to be wrong. I needed it to be nothing." "But it's not nothing, is it?" I stood up, walked around the desk, and pulled her into a hug. "No, sweetheart, it's not nothing. But you did the right thing." The email reached Robert Walsh's inbox at 6:47 Wednesday morning. Subject: Urgent compliance review required. Sender: Vivian Marsh. Copied to Vantage's Board of Directors and General Counsel. I knew because Vivian had forwarded me a copy the moment she sent it. The message was constructed with the precision of a surgical instrument. No accusations, no drama, no language that could be characterized as personal. A formal notification that preliminary findings during a routine ethics assessment had identified irregularities in expense reporting and interdepartmental conduct requiring immediate investigation. 3 employees flagged for preliminary review. Derek Colton was listed first. Diane was listed second. By 8:30, HR had scheduled interviews. By 9:15, Derek's company vehicle had been suspended pending review. By 10 o'clock, the Whisper network on Vantage's executive floor was operating at full capacity. I watched it from my office 3 floors below, as calm as still water. Diane texted at 10:47. "Can you call me?" I waited 20 minutes. "In a meeting." "Everything okay?" Her reply was immediate. "We need to talk tonight. Important." "Home by 6. I typed back. "Sounds good." Derek arrived at his HR interview looking as though he had aged several years between the previous Friday and that Wednesday morning. He emerged after 90 minutes with his tie loosened and his expression hollowed out. He walked past his team without speaking, went directly into his office and closed the door. His superior Walsh was called in 30 minutes later. Vivian and I had lunch 2 blocks from Vantage headquarters. Quiet booth, no company faces in sight. "They found the hotel receipts," she said, working through her salad. "Both Dallas trips, the fabricated client meetings, the adjacent room charges in San Diego." Derek attempted to characterize it as administrative coincidence. HR wasn't receptive. She paused. Diane's interview is scheduled for tomorrow morning. They're separating the two, comparing accounts, looking for structural inconsistencies. Standard protocol. I took a sip of water. What about the offshore account? Vivian's eyes sharpened. What offshore account? I pulled out my phone, opened a file, slid it across the table. Bank records. An account established in Diane's maiden name. Opened 18 months ago. Current balance, $87,000. Deposits traced to shell entities connected to Derek's vendor network. Vivian studied the documents. Her expression moved through several registers before settling on something harder than concern. Marcus, she said quietly, this isn't workplace misconduct anymore. This is financial fraud. I know. If I bring this to the board, they'll involve law enforcement. This becomes a criminal matter. Good, I said. Let it. She leaned back and looked at me for a moment. The Marcus the First worked with 7 years ago would have tried to contain this, protect the institution's reputation, minimize the radius of damage. 7 years ago, I still believed in protecting things that deserved it, I said. Now I just believe in consequences. She picked up her phone. I'll have this on the board's desk by end of business. Financial fraud triggers a different response timeline. Both Derek and Diane will be suspended by Monday. Criminal referral to federal prosecutors within the week. Asset freezes within 2 weeks. I thought about Diane coming home that evening, expecting to manage whatever conversation would need managing. She had no idea the floor had already given way beneath her. One more thing, I said. Connor, my son, I need a paternity test conducted quietly, discreetly. Can you recommend someone? Vivian's expression softened by a fraction. I'm sorry, Marcus. Don't be. I need to know the truth. She wrote a name and number on the back of a card. Dr. Claire Soren. Complete discretion. Tell her I sent you. That evening, Diane came home at 5:30, early for her. She looked fractured in small ways that her professional polish was struggling to conceal. Makeup that had been perfect this morning showing the micro-erosions of a difficult day. She set her bag on the counter with more force than usual. We need to talk, she said. Of course. I was making dinner. Pasta, garlic bread, the domestic ritual we had performed hundreds of times. HR called me in for an interview tomorrow. Some kind of compliance review. It's about Derek, about expense reports. She looked at me with the expression of someone testing whether the ice would hold. Do you know anything about this? I kept stirring. Should I? Marcus, I'm serious. Someone's making accusations. I turned to face her. Are they accurate? She froze. What? The expense reports, the travel, the hotel charges. Are the accusations accurate? This is absurd. You sound like you've already decided I did something wrong. I asked a question. I haven't accused you of anything. You're my husband, she said, her voice rising. You're supposed to be in my corner. I'm in the corner of the truth, I said calmly. If you didn't do anything wrong, the investigation will reflect that. If you did, you'll face whatever that means. It's not about sides, it's about what's factual. Diane stared at me like I had become an unfamiliar person. I don't know who you are anymore, she whispered. Funny, I said, turning back to the stove. I've been thinking something similar about you for months. Diane's HR interview began Friday morning at 9. She had left the house at 7:30 in her version of battle dress, dark suit, controlled hair, the expression she wore when she was prepared to dismantle something professionally. She believed she was walking into a situation she could navigate with the right framing. She had no concept of what was actually waiting. The interview lasted 4 hours. I know because Vivian texted me status updates every half hour. 9:47, denying all. Claims hotel charges were administrative errors. 10:23, shown the message thread. Her attorney is advising silence. 11:15, bank records on the table. She's gone pale. 12:34, interview concluded. Administrative leave effective immediately. Badge deactivated. Company devices confiscated. Diane called from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring 4 times. Marcus. Her voice was unsteady in a way I had never heard before. Come home, please. I found her in the living room, still in her suit, mascara tracing thin lines down her face. On the coffee table, a Vantage letterhead envelope. Her termination notice. They fired me, she said. Effective immediately. No severance. They're saying fraud, Marcus. Fraud. I sat down across from her. I didn't reach for her. Did you do it? I asked. What? The offshore account. The vendor invoices. The embezzlement. Did you do it? Her face went through a series of expressions before settling on something that looked less like denial and more like collapse. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Derek said it was just restructuring budget allocations. Everyone in sales does things like this. No, I said, they don't. What you're describing is what rationalizing criminal behavior looks like after the fact. Marcus. She looked at me with desperation that might under other circumstances have moved me. You know these systems. You helped build the compliance framework. You can explain to them that this was a misunderstanding. You can fix this. No, I said quietly. I can't. What do you mean you can't? You're my husband. I mean I won't. There's a meaningful difference. She stood up. The desperation was converting into something harder. You're serious. I'm losing everything and you're drawing distinctions. You already lost everything, I said, standing. Today is just when you found out. I walked to my office, retrieved the folder I had prepared 3 weeks earlier, and returned. I set it on the coffee table next to her termination notice. She picked it up. Her hands were not steady. She opened it and began reading. Legal separation, effective immediately. I have moved all my individual income into separate accounts. The house deed is held in a trust inherited from my late mother 3 years ago. You were never on the title. The shared credit cards have been closed. My attorney filed this morning. She looked up from the documents. You planned this. She breathed the words more than said them. You knew. How long? 6 months. Longer in the parts I was honest with myself about. And you said nothing. You watched me walk into this. I watched you make choices, I said. I made sure they were documented. She looked at me with an expression that moved between rage and something rawer than that. Who is this? What happened to the man I spent 17 years with? He got tired of being invisible, I said. He got tired of being the punchline in someone else's story. He got tired of watching his wife throw her head back and laugh while another man described her as his property in a room full of their colleagues. That was a joke, Diane said. One comment at a gala. You're burning 17 years over a joke. You burned 17 years, I said. I'm just dealing with what you left. The phone on the counter rang. I answered. Vivian's voice came through, measured and clear. Marcus, the board has formalized their decision. Both cases are being referred to federal prosecutors. Wire fraud. I wanted you to hear it directly. Thank you, Vivian. I set the phone down and turned back to Diane. She had heard every word. She was very still. Federal charges, she said, barely above a whisper. Marcus, please. I made mistakes. I'm sorry. Don't let this happen. It's already happened, I said. And honestly, Diane, I don't think you're sorry. I think you're sorry you were caught. There's a difference between those two things, and right now you don't seem to understand it. I picked up my car keys. Where are you going? She demanded. I'd suggest your first call be to a criminal defense attorney, I said. You're going to need someone considerably skilled. I left her in the middle of the wreckage she had built, and I didn't look back. Remember that in the description and in the pinned comment you have all our supplements, from fitness to health, in every sense of the word. Dr. Claire Soren called me Monday afternoon. I was in my car, parked in the pickup lane outside Connor's school, watching 12-year-olds pour through the main doors with the careless energy of people who don't yet know how comprehensively the world can shift without warning. Mr. Hale, I have your results. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Go ahead. Based on the DNA analysis, the probability that you are Connor's biological father is 0%. I had known, suspected it for months, built the suspicion into the architecture of my thinking without ever fully acknowledging it. But confirmation still arrived like something physical, a weight that found its placement in the chest and settled there. Thank you, doctor. I ended the call and sat watching the doors. Then I saw Connor. He was talking with two friends, backpack hanging off one shoulder, mid-laugh about something. When he spotted my car, his face did what it always did. Lit up, uncomplicated, immediate. He said something to his friends and jogged over, climbing into the passenger seat. "Hey, Dad." He buckled in. "Can we get ice cream, Dad?" He still called me Dad. "Ice cream sounds exactly right," I said. We drove to his usual place and got cones and sat on the bench outside. Connor talked about a math quiz, about soccer practice, about some game I had no frame of reference for. The normal, unguarded conversation of a 12-year-old who hadn't yet learned to protect himself from adults. When he paused to work through a particularly aggressive bite of chocolate chip, I spoke. "Connor, I need to tell you something." He looked at me with that direct, unguarded attention. "What's wrong? Your mom and I are separating. We're going to get a divorce." The light went out of his expression in stages. "Is it because of me?" "No," I said, firmly, without any hesitation. "Not because of you. Not even slightly because of you. This is between me and your mom, and it has nothing to do with who you are or anything you've done. But I need you to hear this clearly. Whatever happens, I'm still your dad. That doesn't move, that doesn't change." He was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "Even though you might not be my real dad?" The question arrived like a freight train around a blind corner. I kept my expression level. "Who told you that?" "I heard Mom on the phone last week. She said you'd probably leave once you found out." His voice had gone very small. "That I wasn't really yours, 12 years old, carrying that by himself." "Look at me," I said. Connor raised his eyes to mine, his own threatening to overflow. "Biology is a fact. Love is a choice. I have been your father since the day you were born, and I will be your father until the day I stop breathing. That's not conditional. That's not negotiable. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "But what if he wants to be involved?" Connor said quietly. "The real dad." "There is no other dad," I said. "There's just me, and I'm not going anywhere." He broke apart then. 12 years of performing composure, of being the kid who held it together, dissolving into sobs that he pressed against my shoulder while families and strangers moved around us on the sidewalk. I held him and said nothing because nothing was required. "I want to stay with you," he said when the worst of it had passed. "Not Mom, you." "Then that's exactly what we'll figure out," I said. "You and Sophie both. We'll build this together." That evening, Sophie appeared in my office doorway. She had been quiet since Friday, processing things with the internal thoroughness that had always made her extraordinary. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you actually okay?" I thought about giving her the easy answer. But Sophie was 16 and had been carrying 47 audio files for 8 months. She deserved something better than easy. "No," I said, "not yet. But I will be. And mi pareja will you and Connor." "I hate her," Sophie said quietly. "Is that wrong?" "It's honest." She sat down. "Did you know about Connor, that he wasn't yours biologically?" "I suspected. Now I know. Does it change anything about him?" "Not one thing about how I feel about him. It changes a lot of other things." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good, because he's my brother. I don't care what any test says. Neither do I." She pulled out her phone. "I have one more thing. I wasn't sure if I should show you, but I think you need to know." She pressed play. Diane's voice, from 3 weeks prior, talking to someone I didn't recognize. "Marcus won't fight me on custody. He's too passive. I'll get the kids, the house, probably half his retirement. His connections won't help him once people know about the affair. Nobody takes sides against HR when the other person has a reputation for process." The other voice, female, unmistakably comfortable, responded. "What about proof of anything, Diane?" "There's nothing. Marcus barely registers what's happening around him. He's been checked out for years. This will be easy." Sophie stopped the recording. "She was planning it, Dad, systematically." "I know, sweetheart, but she miscalculated." "All of us," I said. The federal indictment came down Wednesday morning. Vivian had called to make sure I heard it before the press release went public. United States versus Derek Colton and Diane Hale, wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. 19 counts in total, each carrying potential sentences of up to 20 years. By 3 in the afternoon, it was breaking across local business news. By 4, Diane's name and photograph were appearing on television. My phone became a different object than it had been that morning. Colleagues, former mutual friends, people we'd spent years socializing with, all suddenly needing to say something. I turned it off. Sophie texted me from the living room couch. "It's everywhere. Kids at school are already talking." I replied, "I'll be home by 5. Derek's situation had moved in parallel. His wife, Nadine, had filed for divorce within 24 hours of his termination. She had secured one of Houston's most effective family law attorneys and filed for full custody of their 3 children. Vivian had quietly connected us. Nadine was furious in the way that very capable people are furious. Precisely, without waste. "He built an entire other life and expected me not to notice," she said. "I asked questions once and he told me I was being paranoid." A pause. "Vivian mentioned you might be willing to share documentation, hotel records." "I'll send everything I have," I said. "Thank you. And Marcus, I'm sorry you're going through this too. We'll come out the other side," I said. "Both of us." That evening, Diane appeared at the front door. I had changed the locks that morning. She rang the bell several times, then knocked. I opened the door but didn't step back. She looked like someone who had not slept. Makeup gone, hair pulled back in a way that looked more like surrender than choice. "I need to talk to you," she said. "No, Marcus, please. Federal prison, 20 years. I need you to tell them I didn't understand what Derek was doing, that I was misled." "Were you misled? Did you not understand that fabricating vendor invoices was fraudulent? That a hidden offshore account in your maiden name was illegal? That no one compelled you to sign those expense reports?" Her jaw worked. "It's more complicated than that." "No," I said, "it really isn't. You made choices, knowing choices. Now you face the consequences of them. That's not complicated. That's how accountability functions. You're going to let them send me to prison. I'm not letting anyone do anything. You did this. What about Connor and Sophie? What about our children? They'll be with me, full custody. You're welcome to explain your visitation situation to a federal judge when the time comes." Something in her face shifted into territory I hadn't seen before. Uglier, more cornered. "You self-righteous fraud. You act like you're above all of this, like you're my paressa, morally pristine." "I'm not above anything," I said. "I'm just honest about what I did and didn't do. You've been lying for my paressa long. That honesty probably sounds like arrogance. I gave you 17 years. I gave you my trust and my career capital and every quiet sacrifice that kept your professional image intact. You converted all of it into an affair and a federal criminal case. Mi pareja, take your moral commentary to your defense attorney. I hear they're very good at helping people reframe their decisions." I closed the door. She knocked for a while, then she didn't. Sophie was in the hallway. "Is she going to prison?" "Probably." Sophie nodded. Then she went upstairs. Connor came out of the kitchen. "Was that Mom?" "Yeah. I don't want to see her." "You don't have to. Not now. Not until you decide you want to. If that day ever comes, that's entirely your choice." I knelt down to meet his height. "Whatever you feel right now is the right thing to feel. All of it." He hugged me, hard, the way kids hug when they've decided you're the thing worth holding on to. "Thanks, Dad." "Always, buddy." The trial ran 3 weeks. Federal prosecutors presented a case built on an architecture that left almost no room for reasonable doubt. Bank transfer records, fabricated invoice chains, email threads where Derek and Diane discussed in explicit and specific language exactly how they were moving money that didn't belong to them. Vivian testified on the 4th day. Her delivery was the most composed thing I had ever watched in a courtroom, methodical, authoritative, devastating. She walked the jury through Vantage's ethics framework clause by clause, showing precisely where and how the documented conduct violated each provision. Several of those provisions had language I had written. She didn't mention that. She didn't need to. Nadine testified on day 7. She described the pattern. The late nights she'd been told were client commitments, the hotel charges she'd questioned and been dismissed about, the systematic construction of a second life made possible by the absence of anyone asking the right questions. She looked directly at Derek through most of her testimony. He looked at the table. Sophie testified on day 9. My 16-year-old daughter stood in federal court and presented 47 audio recordings to a jury of 12 people. Diane's defense attorney moved to have the recordings excluded on the grounds of unauthorized recording. The judge denied the motion without extended deliberation. One-party consent jurisdiction. Sophie had recorded conversations she was party to. The recordings were admissible. The jury heard Diane's voice discussing the affair in progress, planning asset protection strategies, and laughing with an unnamed friend about how I was too disengaged to notice anything. Sophie walked out of that courtroom with her head level and her shoulders straight. I have never been more proud of any moment in my life. I didn't testify. The evidence didn't need help. Remember that in the description and in the pinned comment you have all our supplements, from fitness to health in every sense of the word. The verdict came back on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all 19 counts. Derek sat motionless while it was read. Diane cried. The specific kind of crying that looks like grief but functions more like the physical release of a pressure system that has nowhere left to go. Her parents in the gallery looked diminished in a way that had nothing to do with age. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. The courtroom was packed with press and former colleagues and family members occupying very different emotional positions. The judge addressed Derek first. 7 years in federal prison, restitution of $2.3 million, permanent professional disqualification in corporate finance. Then Diane, 5 years in federal prison, restitution of $870,000, all professional certifications revoked. The judge's remarks to Diane were direct. She had occupied a position of institutional trust, been responsible for upholding the standards she had systematically violated, and the court found her conduct particularly serious given the specific nature of her professional role. Diane was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. She looked back once, not at her parents, at me. I felt nothing that required a name. Outside, reporters reached for statements. Vivian handled them efficiently. I took Sophie and Connor home. That evening, Nadine called. "It's done," she said. "It's done," I confirmed. "What do we do now?" "We move forward," I said. "Build something that actually holds. Do you think we can?" "I know we can." 18 months later, I stood in Vivian's Boston office signing the partnership agreement that formalized my position as a founding partner of Marsh & Hale Strategic Consulting. The firm had grown in a direction neither of us had fully anticipated. Fortune 100 clients, institutional ethics reform, internal investigation work that required the specific kind of credibility that could only come from someone who had navigated the system from the inside. My reputation as the person who had dismantled a corporate fraud operation from within its own architecture had become, improbably, a professional asset of the first order. My first consulting retainer had been $400,000 for a 3-month engagement. A portion of it went directly into college funds for Sophie and Connor. The rest was structured into investments that would keep their futures intact regardless of what happened to mine. Sophie was 18 now. She would be starting at UT Austin in the fall on a full academic scholarship. She wanted to study law. "Someone has to keep doing this work," she told me, with a directness that made me feel both proud and slightly accountable. Connor was 14, playing varsity soccer despite being the youngest person on the roster. He had stopped having nightmares around 6 months earlier. He had also stopped adding a fractional hesitation before the word dad when he addressed me, a thing mi pareja small that most people would never have noticed it, but that I had been tracking with the same careful attention I brought to everything that mattered. Diane had been released to a supervised transitional facility after serving 3 years of her sentence, reduced for conduct during incarceration. She had written to me twice. I returned both letters unopened. She had supervised visitation rights with Sophie and Connor. Sophie declined every visit. Connor had gone once. He came home quiet for several days. She cried the whole time, he finally told me. Said she was sorry she missed everything. But it felt like she was sorry about what happened to her, not what she did to us. I said he owed her nothing. Not forgiveness, not visits, not emotional resolution he didn't feel. He said, she feels like a stranger. I said, then that's exactly what she is to you right now, and that's okay. Nadine and I had started spending time together about 8 months after the trial concluded. Carefully, without urgency, two people who had survived the same category of thing and found that they understood each other's damage without needing to explain it. Her kids and mine got along in the way that children sometimes do when they've each been through enough to recognize each other across it. We had taken a trip to the coast the previous summer, all 5 of us, and something about it had felt unexpectedly natural. She was talking about relocating to Houston. Her credentials would transfer. We could build something stable in the same place, rather than maintaining 2 households connected by shared experience and evening phone calls. I wasn't ready to call it more than what it was. Maybe that would change. What I knew was that I was capable of trust again, which was something I hadn't been certain of for a long time. One Saturday afternoon, Sophie appeared in my office while I was reviewing a contract. Can we talk? Always. She sat in the same chair she had used when she brought me those 47 audio files. Something about that registered. I've been thinking about writing a book, she said, about what happened, the human cost, what corporate betrayal does to families, what survival looks like from the inside. I looked at my daughter, 18 years old, sharper than most people twice her age. If you write it, I'll read every draft, even the parts about Mom, especially those, even the hard stuff. Truth is the thing, Sophie, even when it costs something. She smiled. You taught me that. You would have figured it out on your own. That evening, I stood on my back porch watching the Houston sky turn its specific colors as the sun went down. My phone lit up with a text from Nadine. Dinner tomorrow. My place. The kids want to try the pizza from scratch. I smiled and typed back. We'll be there. Connor's bringing dessert. Another message arrived from Vivian. Publishing house reached out. They want the full story. 7 figures. Interested? I read that twice. 7 figures to put into words what had happened, what had been lost, what had been built from the rubble. I typed back, yes, let's do it. Because silence had served me well when I was building the case. It had been the right instrument for that season. But this was a different season now. There were people out there sitting in their own version of what I had sat in, second-guessing themselves, wondering if the patterns they were noticing were real, wondering if documenting things made them paranoid, wondering if choosing to act would cost more than choosing to stay. They needed to hear from someone who had made it to the other side, not to encourage revenge, not to make betrayal sound like a game with winners, but to say, the truth is worth the cost of finding it. The rebuilding is worth the wreckage of what came before. Some people spend their lives chasing the satisfaction of watching someone else suffer for what they did. I spent mine building something that didn't require anyone to suffer to have value. In the end, that turned out to be the only kind of victory that stays.